It's easy to think of managing vendors as just another data entry task that we have to tackle as small business owners. But ultimately, like managing our customers, managing our vendors and making sure that we have accurate information in our system is really important to us running a healthy business. Now, we want to make sure, of course, that both our customer and vendor relations are kept up and are maintained well, because that is something that contributes greatly to the health of our business. We want to be sure that if we are sending a check out to a vendor, that check is going to the correct mailing address. Or if we're reaching out to them to find out the status of our account and whether or not we have any outstanding invoices, that we have the account number and are contacting the correct person so that we can quickly and easily get the information that we want. So today, let's go ahead and talk about how we add and edit a vendor and all the different kind of categories that exist there that we can use to make this relationship between QuickBooks and our vendors more seamless and more helpful to us. So there are several different ways that we can add and edit our vendors in QuickBooks Online. Let's go ahead and start by going into the Bank Transactions tab to see how we can add a vendor directly from there and kind of how that ends up shaking out in our books. So if I go to Accounting and then Bank Transactions, which happens to be the first option that pops up, and if I scroll down here to find one of my transactions where I don't yet have a vendor associated with it, I could go ahead and let's take a look at this Cal CPA one, for example. We can see it has not suggested a vendor for it. So if I click into this box, I can add a new vendor. Now, something cool that happens in the bank feed specifically is if you have the bank feed established and if the bank is providing QuickBooks with a transaction description, sometimes QuickBooks will suggest a vendor name for you to add to your vendor profile in your vendor center, okay? While this is a fantastic option, I do want to caution you, it only provides their name. It's not going to provide their mailing address or a phone number or a contact or anything like that, okay? It is very simply just going to be the name. And while there are some vendors where we only need a name in their profile because we're not going to be sending them checks or we're not going to be paying them via ACH, maybe we're only paying them with a credit card or directly with our debit card, that's totally possible. This is only a good option if you're not going to need any of the rest of that information at any point, okay? So for this particular one, this is for Cal CPA, for example, odds on this is for something like professional development. This probably isn't a bill where I'm going to be receiving mail from them or anything like that. So I could absolutely go through this process and just say, yes, let's add Cal CPA. And what that's going to do is it's going to pop out this vendor management window. And as I said, it's only going to be putting the company name and vendor display name in. It's not going to be providing any additional information. Now, at this point, if I had additional information, I could add this here and scroll down and add it in other sections if I wanted to or needed to. But I can also just leave it with the vendor display name, okay? Now, here is something that I do want to call your attention to. You might be thinking, well, if I don't need any of that information, do I even need to enter a vendor name to tie this transaction to? And the answer ultimately is it kind of depends. At the end of the day, I recommend adding vendor and customer names, even if you are maybe not going to be using that customer or vendor all the time, specifically because you want to have that detail so that if you go and run further reports down the road, you'll know exactly how much you spent with each vendor. This is similar to the customer side of things. If I enter an income transaction and do not associate a customer with it, I'm not going to be able to find that payment in any customer profile. Now, again, this is all about managing relationships, right? I want to associate every payment that a customer sends to me with their customer profile so that I have the most up-to-date, complete information, not only for my own purposes, but to provide to them if they ask, okay? Vendor relationships are slightly different. Maybe, there are certain general ones that you don't necessarily need to do this with. I'm not necessarily going to be visiting the same gas station every day in my business. I'm not necessarily going to be going to the same restaurants. So there are instances where sometimes you could put a vendor in that says gas stations and have all the transactions associated with gas stations going there, or restaurants and have all the transactions associated with restaurants going there. That is totally fine. But for anything that's a little bit more granular, where you might be seeing them being used on an ongoing basis, or where you might want to know how much you spent with a specific vendor, you definitely want to have a name associated with them so that you can view this information in their vendor profile, okay? So for this one, I can go ahead and hit save right here, and that will have added them to my vendor profile. Now, again, I didn't put any other information in there. So if down the road I develop a higher level relationship with them and I'm spending more money with them, or have decided to pay them via check instead of with my credit card, I can go in and add an address or whatever other information I might need, okay? So that is one way to add a vendor, and that is the kind of streamlined version that allows you to do it directly here where you're already adding transactions, okay? It prevents you from having to go out of this screen to go add a vendor. But if you are setting up a new vendor that you're going to be using on an ongoing basis, and that you're going to be paying via ACH or via check, you probably want to go through a slightly more detailed process to get their information in. So let's go ahead and dive into that now. In order to add a vendor, you're going to want to go over to All Apps, Expenses and Bills, and then Vendors, okay? This is going to pull up your vendor center, and you can see there are a lot of similarities between your vendor and customer center. You can see what is unpaid, what's outstanding, what has been paid. All that information is happening right up here at the top. And then you have all of this information down here in the grid. So you have all of your vendors listed out, and then if there is additional information in here for the vendors, like for example, for Pinnacle Office Supplies, we see we have an email for them and some other information, that will be visible to you here. Okay, now if you don't want to scroll, you can always search for a vendor name. So I can search for Nope, and Nope Social Media comes up, okay? So that is one of the things that we can do to kind of make getting into our vendor information a little bit easier, okay? Now, in order to add a vendor here, we can go up to New Vendor in the upper corner and just click that button. And you can see the screen that pops out is identical to that screen that we saw in the Bank Transactions tab. Now, for our example today, I do actually have a new vendor to add into my books. It's an IT consulting firm that I am going to be working with. So I have over on my other screen here all of their information so that I can start copying it in. Now, another thing I want to just call your attention to here is you can see, and I think I'm actually blocking it. Sorry, there we go. You can see we have a name and contact, and this little image right here matches this image up here. So this is one way that you can navigate through this vendor screen a little bit more easily. You can actually click on these various cards and it will take you down to the section that is associated with that particular card. So if I click on this one, the little kind of map dot, it is going to take me down to address. If I click on this little pencil edit guy, it's going to take me down to notes and attachments. So you can see where that makes navigating and going to the correct portion of the entry screen a little bit easier. So first and foremost, I'm going to start putting in the company information right here. And I have it over on this other screen, so I can just start copying and pasting it in, okay? We have the contact. And I do have an email for him, as well as a phone number, a mobile number, and a fax number. All right, so something to keep in mind here whenever you're entering information, I always like to have a contact name on my vendor profiles. And quite simply, this is because I love developing relationships with people and getting to know them, whether they're customers or vendors of mine, because at the end of the day, it makes operating your business a lot easier. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is if I have somebody who I am familiar with that I am calling in and they know about me and my business and I know about them and what's going on, that's going to make getting in any information that I need a lot easier. But another thing to keep in mind is this person's relationship to this company, right? So we can see here, I have the company name, but when I entered Marcus's name here, it changed the vendor display name to his name. Now, that might be totally fine if he is the business owner and therefore basically synonymous with the business. But if he is an employee at the business, I might not want the vendor display name to be his name, because if he's an employee, he might leave, go find another job, what have you, right? So knowing that and basically identifying where this person stands in relation to the company is really important. I'm going to say, for the case of this example, let's just pretend that Marcus is actually an employee of the business. So while he is going to be my primary contact that I would reach out to if I had any questions or needed any help, I don't want to have his name on any checks that I send to this business or any communications or anything like that, because ultimately I am a client of the business and he happens to handle my account, right? It's one of those things where we want to make sure we understand the relationship and have it reflected accurately in our books, okay? Now you can see here we have a whole bunch more information. This is going to be his email, but maybe we also have an AP email, right? Or actually for them it would be AR, accounts receivable at Northstar IT Solutions.com. Whoops. All right, so maybe if I am emailing them asking about the status of my invoices or anything like that, I might want to have the AR email in there so that I am reaching out to their accounts receivable department so that they can help me, okay? All right, so now let's look at some of these other fields that we have available to us, okay? We have a street address. Now, again, in the world where we mostly send payments digitally, we may or may not need an address on file, okay? At the end of the day, I tend to err on the side of caution where if somebody has provided me with the information, I'm going to put it in, because just because we handle something one way right now doesn't mean it won't change in the future, okay? So maybe right now I'm paying them with my credit card because that was just the easiest way to get started, but maybe at some point in the future, they're going to start billing me on a monthly basis. If that happens, maybe I'm going to decide that I would rather pay them via ACH or check, at which point I might want to have this information already at my fingertips and ready to go. So I will go ahead and add this information here. Okay. And then I can also add any notes or attachments. So for example, if I have a contract with them that outlines what they're going to be doing for me in exchange for whatever price I'm paying, I might want to add that here. Additionally, if I do plan to use the integrated QuickBooks system to pay them, I might want to add their bill payment ACH information, right? Also, this is a service-based business. IT would be considered service-based. So if it is an individual providing me this information, or even if it is a company of certain structures, I might want to make sure that I have their business ID number or social security number in play so that when it comes time for me to send 1099s, I already have that information and I'm not scrambling to try to find it at the end of December so that I can send those promptly in January, okay? Last thing we have here is terms and other items like that. So if we have terms with this vendor, and I believe that they did actually extend me, yes, they extended me net 15 terms for this particular contract, okay? And I have an account number with them as well. Now, this is, the example that always pops into my mind when I see account numbers for vendors is something like a utility, right? When you get your utility bill, you have an account number up at the top. It's usually like 16 digits because, of course, utilities have tons of clients. But it basically allows them, if you ever have to call them to ask a question about your bill or anything like that, if you provide them with that number, they're going to be able to find your information much more quickly and get to the bottom of whatever is happening on your account, Okay, so if we have an account number, it never hurts to put this in the vendor center and into the vendor profile so that if you're ever calling again, you just have that information at the ready and can immediately get started with the conversation. Okay. So now that I have all this information in, and as I would like to see it, I can go ahead and hit save. Okay, so that has added a new vendor to my vendor center. And we can see here, we have no transactions associated with them yet, which because I'm just getting started with this, that is exactly what I would expect. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a quick look at what I might end up doing if I needed to edit a vendor's information. Okay, and this can happen for a variety of reasons. Maybe your primary contact left the company and is no longer there, and you need to update the contact name on the file. Maybe they moved offices, and so you need to have an up-to-date mailing address for them. Or maybe they had fraud occur on their bank, and so you need to change their bank account information so that your payments are going to the correct place, okay? Any of these are instances where we might want to go in and edit the existing information on our vendor profiles. So let's go ahead and pick a vendor and make some edits. All right, so let's say that I received communication from Pinnacle Office, and basically what they told me was, hey, when we were first working with you to get your lease up and going for your office space, we had you communicating with Office, with the Office email. But now that you are renting space from us, we actually want to see communications, or you're going to be seeing communications coming from our accounts receivable person. And so we want to have that, we want to make sure you have that email on file so that you're aware when information comes through, that is where it's supposed to be coming from. So I might go down to Pinnacle Office down here, and to open up their vendor profile, I'm going to go ahead and just click anywhere on that gray line. Then once I am in their vendor profile, I can select edit and I can change or add information. Okay, so maybe I don't want to get rid of Office, but maybe I don't want that to be the primary email on their file anymore. I can cut that and paste it down, and then I can put in ar@pinnacleoffice.com. And that will be their corrected information. Okay, I can again also add any additional information here that I think would be useful. But if I am just paying them, with a check that I happen to just drop by their office because we are in the same building or anything like that, maybe that's not necessary for this particular vendor. Okay. All right, so this is basically how we add and edit vendors in QuickBooks Online. I know this was a lot of information, so if you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so that you'll be alerted to new videos in the future. I'm Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.